So thank you so much for joining the Nashua, Squannacook, and Nissitissit Rivers Wild and Scenic Stewardship Council for the first presentation of our 2026 Invasive Species Management Speaker Series. This series is just one of many ways that the Council is seeking to support and accelerate invasive species management on a regional scale. So today I have the pleasure of introducing Joe Johnson um, for his talk on fostering community engagement in invasive species management. Joe holds a bachelor's degree in sociology of urban affairs with a concentration in earth science from Bridgewater State. He completed the UMass Amherst Green School program in arboriculture and the certificate program on invasive plant management. Joe is a Worcester tree steward, volunteer forest ranger with the Blackstone Collaborative, and volunteer ranger for the Greater Worcester Land Trust. He runs the Facebook groups Invasive Plant and Insects of Worcester, Massachusetts, and Dodge Park Renaissance. So during Joe's talk, please feel free to add your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand after he's finished to ask in person. So, Joe, without further ado, please take it away.
Okay. Welcome everybody on this beautiful day. At least it is here. And I'd like to introduce you a little bit more to myself. I'm not a highly trained expert in any of these areas. I have a long-term experience, and I'm a volunteer. And with the steps and things I'm taking you through today, it's not my usual kind of presentation. I'm usually speaking about plants and propagules and erosion and all sorts of other things. But I had this opportunity to really look into what's going on. And the reason I have this copy of the Rambler here with my picture on it is recently, I seem to have been elevated or found a way to be led to expand my reach throughout all of the Blackstone Heritage Corridor. And it's through some of these programs. So let me just move ahead into the program that I have for you now, and we'll see where we go from there. So what I'm going to be talking about is going from engagement to full stewardship. And what I mean by that is going from the point where you're first introduced to an invasive plant and you can't not see it anymore. That's when we move from awareness, we have that awareness. And that's where we try to move our volunteers from that awareness to some sort of actions or abilities that they can do to support. So we do this by supporting what communities already do and look to bring volunteers in there. I know I'm not being very clear with that yet, but I'll develop that point. But we want to go is from that awareness to a lasting stewardship that grows from local momentum, not from imported programs, but from a sense of community. We're talking about watersheds. They don't follow political boundaries. They follow the flow of water. Oh, we all know I believe we all know what a watershed is and how it's one self-contained event of the flow of water that moves from the highest point in the catchment area all the way to the ocean. We're talking about invasives, and they touch multiple community systems, waterways, flood-prone areas, people, property, and daily activities. All of this is affected by, community systems, community-wide, such as this knotweed on a dam at Coe's Pond. This is a community problem. It's not just something that doesn't look right. It's actually a hazard that's unrecognized and untreated. I've worked on this site for 4 years, but I'm not going to concentrate on this site. It's just an example. So I want to bring environmental stewardship at the watershed scale, and we're looking at this through a riparian vegetation invasive lens. Riparian vegetation is critical to the watershed infrastructure. It connects our uplands, the streams, ponds, the downstream waters. And invasive riparian plants act as a system level stressor. Um, they interfere with the entire system from top to bottom. They move along with the flow of water. So upstream failures exports the downstream risk, which is why we focus as a community on the entire watershed, because vegetation management is watershed management. With our stewardship in practice, I look at stewardship as of invasives as managing risk. Invasive plant management is not aesthetics, because invasives destabilize the banks and they destroy native habitat, and floods relocate soil, seeds, and propagules. They damage our infrastructure and they increase costs. Stewardship is the removal, the stabilization, and native replacement, in my mind. That's what a steward is looking for and to. And success equals upstream to downstream coordination of our volunteers. When speaking of invasive plants as a hazard, this is just an example of one site, the first time I saw it in Worcester. And after 5 years, we really haven't moved the needle much. Now the city removes the knotweed canes from in front of the culvert here, and the local landowner cuts down the knotweed, and that's as far, as I could get with this particular place. So these things are a community issue, because the costs, they show up in our municipal budgets, and the impacts are paid for communities. It's not just the land manager costs that come. When we don't deal with invasive plants, costs flow down the entire watershed from town to town, place to place. Our invasives persist despite of awareness because of fragmented ownership and responsibility. Those of us who've been out there doing this work have probably run into the problem of running into a property line and not being able to continue to pursue the removal or the repair. We always seem to lack follow-up funding. And I'll be speaking a little bit more about that. And there's a mismatch between project timelines and plant phenology or plant biology, such as having everybody available to work on knotweed, but it not being in the prime time to deal with it. The invasives persist despite that we know they're there because of the fragmented ownership and fragmented responsibility. And so what IPM failures teach us is we have to plan. And we have to plan follow-up from the start. We have to tie monitoring to a response. If people are just simply seeing and reporting plants and getting no return or a problem back, we lose them right there. You've lost a potential volunteer because they said, hey, there's a problem here. I see the plant. I know what it is. What are we going to do about it? And if we don't have a good response, they're gone. Alignment. We have to make sure that these projects aren't just because we have some volunteers available and we just want to go cut something. It has to align with the plant biology so that our volunteers see the results. They don't come back next year and see things worse. Community engagement is actually essential because we're looking for things like early detection and long-term control. It depends on observers and stewards observing and reporting, because invasives spread by everyday activities that we all engage in: mowing, boating, construction, snow removal, and yard waste management. The entire community has to participate because no single agency alone can deal with this problem. Community for some reason. Uh, Community barriers to community action, there's another thing. If we have poorly defined volunteer roles, um, we again lose our volunteers. If we get everybody together, but it turns out just to be a coffee meeting, or people aren't given some education and some training and take some things back from these meetings, we can't keep them. Sometimes people fear doing harm. And it's a training issue, but we don't want a bunch of people tramping through the wetland, or they're just going to make it worse, or they won't know which plants to pull, and they'll damage native plants. All of those sort of fears need to be dealt with when we're bringing our groups together. And there's always that regulatory and technical uncertainty. Nothing stops a project faster than, oh, we need a permit. Nothing stops it faster. Um, but now that I've tried to review the invasives from a point of view of not really digging down to any particular one, let's talk about what effective engagement looks like. So when I have a group, I'm looking, I have monitoring. We have the monitoring, people report. We have fellowship and stewardship. It's a pathway to involvement beyond a single event. Having clear response pathways is really about who responds, who answers, who decides what to do. It's having a place where you can report something and you can get a reply or an answer or a follow-up. And this is, where I've had more experience as having a Facebook group that's been going on for 5 years now, where I try to make sure all my answers come from research that's published and peer reviewed, so that I can answer the questions well, or as best as I can. And at the same time, that's been my major method of education, besides the UMass Landscape School, which the bulk of the courses and seminars I've taken have come from them. Visible outcomes over time. We have to have real lasting changes. There's nothing more disappointing for a group to go out and do something like a bittersweet removal in an area where the bird activity is the primary contributor to the new sprouts, and have them come back the next year and see more there after we cleared an area, because we didn't deal with how the bittersweet is arriving in that area. Examples of that are near reservoirs or near farm edges, things like that, places that attract the birds. So the next thing, we're doing recruitment, retention, and program design. It's so important to have the clear job descriptions, the hands-on training and plant ID and removal tools, which is one of the events that I like to do, especially with garden clubs when they're dealing with things like removing weeds from their rain gardens and things like that. Doing demonstrations of actual weeding tools that come from other countries, methods in management of being efficient at weeding. Those type of things have been very, very helpful to me in making inroads to the native plant and garden groups in order to bring them in for this kind of recognition. I always try to do things in recruitment and retention, like pair new volunteers with experienced mentors, and provide, the basics of any gathering, which is support, food, and recognition. I try to make sure that's part of every event that I run. for keeping people, you need to have flexible schedules and inclusive roles. And by inclusive roles, I mean people who feel like they're actually contributing to what we're doing and having input. It takes patience and listening. And finally, tracking hours and progress for accountability. And I say these things because I really didn't feel like I was getting anywhere fast until about 2 years ago. And for me, in my watershed, it was the Blackstone Heritage Corridor that coordinated all the volunteers. Things really took off with them. They provided me with training, chainsaw certification, so that I felt safe and confident in using power tools out there. They provided me with volunteers. Um, they were able to do the stuff that would take me sort of off mission of working uh, on invasive removals and replacements and restoration projects because they took away the need for me to do the recruiting, which is something that I'm not as good at. And um, I think that really is a helpful thing. For instance, here's one of my groups that I took out. Um, And this is really, this site here is a combined effort of DCR, the Blackstone Heritage Corridor, and Santander Bank got together on this little project. Santander Bank gave us $250 to purchase native plants to install in the rain gardens and swales that we have here. Um, and they, spent 3 hours with me. They learned what the plants were, how to plant them, and we had a good time. I just put them in here as an example. So I want to take people from engagement like that to stewardship to co-watershed management. So I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by those terms. Um, but engagement, day of service. Very, very popular, very good for me because I get a group of people coming in, and maybe good for the organizers that look to find me the volunteers because they're able to enter into programs, visit banks and places, and talk to them about these days of service. And about 3/4 of my events that I participate in or build in are day of service events where someone says, we have a group. Joe, do you have a project? Sometimes I have a project. Sometimes I have to look for people. But that's how these things work on. Um, so once we have this day of service, we begin to look to bring people into a stewardship position. And stewards have assigned locations. They do repeat visits, monitoring and reporting, and they begin to develop some feelings or attraction or a liking to an area. This is sort of the progress that I think of when I get new volunteers, and how am I going to take them from this one day where they seem to enjoy it to here we are with the adopt a reach or a site. This is structural stewardship. This is similar to what happened when the people who were developing me as a volunteer said, Joe, the tree steward program in Worcester is ending, but you really seem to like that. Would you like to adopt a park? And this is how I adopted, and my wife adopted Dodge Park, which is a big part of my development in skills. And it was people in Worcester developing me as a volunteer. So like I was saying in the very beginning, well, I'm not college trained at what I'm doing. I didn't spend my 32 years of my life was spent working at UPS. So I have a short period of time with this, but I've been developed up to this point. And people seem to respect me for what I know and what I do. And it's been a very rewarding sort of mixture of being developed and wanting to do more. And so this leads to co-watershed management in the end. And this is what I've become involved with during the last year and a half. Is probably why um, people who are working with me seem to be promoting me to do more of these events and reach out other watersheds, other places, and start looking for management entities, for co-watershed management, partnering with other entities to do events, monitoring, and hazard mitigation within a watershed is the easiest part. I'm beginning to move to the next stage, which is to begin to reach out and talk about things that we might be able to cooperate on. This is an example. This group here, it's two mother and daughter teams. They are site stewards. They love this park. They live near this park. They always turn out for cleanup events that not just Earth Day, but I do several cleanup events, and they love it. They report to me when there's a problem in the park or if there's something going on. This is an example of some happy, wonderful volunteers that are site stewards. They notice the problem, they live in the area, they understand this park, they understand when something's going south. It's so valuable, very, very valuable people to me. They're site stewards. They love Dodge Park. So we want to take people from an observers to a steward. So let me do another one of those little step-by-steps. We got our casual observers. This is when we need to be most careful and let observers know that there is something that can be done, that seeing something isn't going to just convince them that it's just not worth it to do anything. So we get them to guided monitoring and maybe some data collection. So as a next step, we might be encouraging them to use iNaturalist or EdgeMap or some program to just gather more information about, or a Facebook place where they can report and talk about the issues. And that's what this guided monitoring and data collection was about. What do we get after we get that far? We get an informed participant. These are people that begin to know things, that they begin to share information, they begin to talk to the city councilor, they begin to talk to the DPW representative that's there, because they're beginning to understand what it takes to preserve a watershed. They understand the methods and the seasonal patterns. So if you don't develop stewards who pay attention to a particular site or an area on the watershed, how are they going to understand the seasonal patterns? So we get people who are really good. Now we've got a trained steward. And so this is how the progression goes. It's important to get the casual observer to know that they can make an effect. It's informing them, training them, teaching them so they understand methods, focusing them on a seasonal pattern. And we're moving people from an observer to a steward. Now these people are participating in long-term care, decision support, and leadership. It's not for me to decide exactly what everybody wants to do with their public land, but it is important that I involve them in the decision-making and the long-term care and educate about what needs to be done. And what we end up with is a site specialist, and that's what I really love. So moving from independent groups to coordinated action is important. We need to build projects that invite partners in. We need to share protocols for monitoring. We need to sponsor networking events. So we design collaborative projects. It's important that I found that there seemed to be some silos in my city between organizations, or a little bit, but they seemed easier to break down when we focused on a specific site or a location and then contacted the other organizations that we wanted to do something there. And so that was a way to build collaboration that works smoothly and sort of naturally. Um, Other things that we can do, I talked about iNaturalist and others, EdsMap, people who have GIS experience. We need to share protocols and applications for monitoring and mapping. We need to sponsor the networking events, just like, well, this is a tiny one, but all sorts of networking events where we can bring people together from the different organizations that represent the watershed. And I never realized how many there could be in a watershed until I got involved. So if we sponsor networking events, we bring together NGOs, garden clubs, agencies, and think in terms of the entire watershed. We can have these events that really move the needle. So this is an example of a gigantic event we had in Worcester, where we brought a big name was brought into Clark University, Doug Tallamy. We have a place where we have, it was over 200 people that attended the event. This is a time that you never miss the opportunity to obtain permission to collect an email list or events like this. It would be a shame to have let this entire group that showed such a strong interest to travel to see this event to not make a really good attempt to capture their information and involve them in the situation. These groups shape what gets planted in the parks and along streets. These are the people that come out and most likely vote on these issues. And this is where we need to be in looking for our volunteers. So community networks are essential as invasive plant management infrastructure. Community networks provide scale, continuity, and local knowledge. And that's what we need. The continuity is something, because volunteers extend monitoring, detection, and follow-up capacity. And collaboration turns isolated projects into larger landscape level control, the whole watershed type of work that we're looking for. And what we want to do is we want to move from education to building the invasive plant collaborative network. So events that I found that I needed to do as I was working on invasive plants is I needed to reach out to all of the other groups around, and that was garden clubs, native plant initiatives, native plant groups, seed starters, and so on. So my idea of reaching out is, hello, you have an event coming up. Do you need some help? And then when I get to the event, making sure that I volunteer, I make it easier for them. I help, I contribute, I volunteer. But I don't actually join the group and sign up for everything, but I help. And this, over this last 6 years, is what's built up my relationships in the Blackstone Heritage Corridor and in the Worcester area, is by going to these, presenting, take the soil and put it in the boxes, go out to their cars and carry the stuff in. This is how I meet people and make these kind of events. These events bind together like-minded individuals into networks. Land managers and agencies are anchoring long-term strategy, and networks enable coordinated removal, restoration, and monitoring. But we're approaching what Doug Tallamy said here: habitat's rebuilt one parcel at a time, but it only works when the parcels are connected. So this is why volunteering as an issue is looked at the watershed scale is so important to me. Uh, this is a good example of what the education is going on. This was at a farm in Grafton that provides uh, tens of thousands or even over hundred thousand pounds of food for the community, food banks and so on, fresh food and others. And the Grafton Land Trust asked me to uh, bring in a group that could work on and examine the problem that they have around their borders where the birds sit to eat the crops. So I worked with a group there on how to pull, manage, and treat the bittersweet uh, there. This group will come back again next year. This bank has also sent people who are not on an official thing that work at this farm. So this kind of educational event really went a long way uh, to educate. And it was just so interesting to see the head farmer there come over and listen to the talk that we gave on the other side and realize that the reason he had all of this bittersweet in the tree line in this area was where they raised their blueberries. And the birds came to eat those blueberries, but they were already preloaded with bittersweet seeds. And an entire area was set up. So the farmer is thinking of strategies to try to move the birds. I don't know how successful that's going to be, but it's the result of this kind of education. So what I'm doing here is I'm turning observers into the path of stewardship. They're getting education, they're getting some hands-on setup, and they're also participating in the community and enjoying it. So there's some volunteer stewardship models that kind of follow along with what I'm trying to develop here. And monitoring first. This is when we bring volunteers in as trained observers before we ask them to be labor or stewards. Um, these are light teaching events. What I do for these are often an invasive plant walk in an area people are concerned about, where I take a group of people out and just discuss, I'll pre-scout it. I'll look for the problems. And after pre-scouting it, I'll break it down into a couple of places to stop and point out what's there. These have been very good. And in particular, they've gotten the attention of local politicians who took actions as a result of some of these walks. So monitoring first is a good way to start. Just showing people so that you get them to the point where they can't unsee the invasive plants in your watershed. And then we have the seasonal scoped action days. These bring in volunteers for the short haul. But these are where we scale them to long-term stewardship. My favorite of these, as I mentioned earlier, is Earth Day, where I get some pretty large groups. And it's really important. I really try to do Earth Day. I make sure I've got pizza, I got stuff on site, I've got everything I need for people. And I'm on my best game as far as trying to get people information, signed up, maybe some short-term commitments. But these seasonal scoped action days, the popular ones that are well known, this is what brings people out. Once we get these site stewards, they create long-term caretakers for specific river reaches. Not that they become not just one-day volunteers. These are the people we want to develop. I'm not only a site steward, but I'm a long-term caretaker. But it took 6 years to be developed that way. So where to look for volunteer help? I mean, a lot of this stuff is obvious, but it's worth mentioning. Um, Garden groups and planning and restoration have been really my go-to. And in this last year, the pollinator groups. I went back to UMass and got certified in pollinator stewardship so that I could speak a little bit about pollinators. I did learn in that course and that certification that I have a heck of a lot more to learn than I know, but it's fun. And people appreciate that, I know a little and that I know that treating the pollinators is part of any restoration, considering the pollinators part of any restoration during an invasive removal project, that we need to consider that. Just those type of talks has gotten me more help from the pollinator groups. So between the native plants and the pollinator groups, I now have a free and full supply of native plant seeds and plugs that just come to me. Sometimes I get a call, hey, we overplanted our garden. We've got too many tall things up front. Joe, can you come and have a group move them? Yeah. What can be better than free native plants? Of course, we've got the Boy Scouts and youth service projects. I've connected to many of the programs in the city. They're often looking for opportunities. Um, Municipal partners. Now, that's a little tougher, but making relationships with the departments of public works, the park department, and maybe the mayor's office, and so on, those are harder things to do, but they can really turn out some volunteers when they want them. So I'm working on that. I'm not the best at my political relationships, but I'm getting there. And of course, the DCR, the National Forest Service, the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture and Resources, they've been good to me. They've been very good to me as far as getting me training and supporting things. The DCR I just can't say enough about them. The watershed associations, I try to get to at least one meeting of all the watersheds in my city here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that in the entire watershed, but if we all try to, attend some meetings of others, it seems to be a great opportunity for building those bridges where, while I'm not stealing the other guy's volunteers, we may find a way to mix mine with theirs for a project or, and, make those volunteers more focused on the area than they are to the particular group. I don't know if that makes sense, but, help other organizations meet their goals. Find out what their goals are and work for it. Recruit volunteers where volunteers meet. Recruit volunteers where they do things. Match the mission to the people and talents that you have and offer clear projects. I mean, that's my lessons. That's what I've learned. Um, here's one of my Dodge Park Earth Day crews. It's quite a collection. A few of these people actually came to Worcester from the other end of the Blackstone Heritage Corridor down in Pawtucket. Um, and they've come back now 3 years in a row, that small group. So this group here forms the nucleus of people that I go to when I need other volunteer projects done. And Earth Day is a great day to volunteer. Do this day up. This is pizza day. This is just do stuff for these people. Make them happy. Um, Volunteer stewardship's community capacity. Volunteer stewardship is infrastructure. It's not just short-term labor. Um, this site and reach-based stewardship, one of the things this does is it builds continuity. I need to point that out. Sometimes the people who are paid to do stuff change, but the people who belong to the volunteer efforts don't. They're the ones that follow the continuity. They're the ones that train the next paid level person that comes on about what's going on there. Monitoring first engagement with lower barriers, to people coming out. It helps you gather people, and it strengthens efforts like early detection because you're at least developing monitors. Um, you develop persistent and follow-up. Volunteer stewardship is community infrastructure, long-term community capacity, shared responsibility. These models strengthen the IPM. They support monitoring, follow-up, and care. So site reach and stewardship models, volunteers adopt river reaches, floodplain edges, and restoration sites, encouraging repeated visits, early detection, and local ownership. We're building place-based knowledge and neighbor-to-neighbor engagement in areas. Monitoring first and seasonal models. Monitoring first tells us what and where to act. Seasonal models tell us when and how to act. So we monitor first to identify erosion, invasive extent, failure points in storms, and we use seasonal models to align our actions with plant vulnerability and hydrologic risk. We don't want to be treating knotweed at the wrong time. We don't want to be treating Phragmites at the wrong time. We need to know and use seasonal models for our projects so that we have projects that make the volunteers successful. This is kind of what I'm talking about with volunteer pathways and IPM outcomes. We offer them these clear pathways. We create local leaders who reduce our dependence on staff and improve the continuity. We get IPM that persists across seasons, funding cycles, and jurisdictions. The models that make IPM stick, we have these clear roles. We've got the seasonal scoped action days, volunteer effort tied to monitoring. And here we are with surviving staff turnover, funding cycles, and even jurisdictional boundaries can be reduced with these clear stewardship setups. And, why do IPM projects sometimes fail? We need to look at the downside. One-time removal events without follow-up and monitoring. It's very tempting a lot of times when you have the people and you have something and you want to just do something to do a removal event, and next year you've got a worse situation you're looking at because you didn't want to waste that. So it's something to pay attention to when your removal efforts really have to contain follow-up and monitoring into the project description. And this is just a follow-up. Restoration projects that lack aftercare money. You can have all the plans you want, but if you don't have the money support, how are you going to move the project forward? Over-reliance on volunteers in the technical roles. Maybe that applies to someone like me, but I see even in the watershed I'm in that people realize you can't over-rely on a volunteer, even if they have those technical skills, because after all, we're volunteers. The technical roles do need some paid positions. Monitoring without authority or resources to act. That's the most frustrating of all. That's someone who runs around the city and takes a picture of this and that, tells it to the city council, and nothing happens. Then you're monitoring without authority, and that'll fail. IPM efforts confined by property. That's, like I said early in the beginning, getting to a property and getting to the fence line and still having more invasives on the other side. They're going to come back. You can't treat them. And it's super frustrating to people, and makes problems between neighbors. And project timelines that don't match invasive plant biology. We have the money now, we have the people now. It's not the right time. And most failures stem from structure and time constraints, not bad intentions. There's some lessons, plan, follow-up, and monitoring from the start. Restoration budgets have to include aftercare. I know I'm repeating myself a lot here, but these are the essential things. Provide structured stewardship models. Be thinking about how you take people from that first realization that invasive plants exist to being concerned about the entire watershed. This story, this model that I need to develop much better, obviously, but I'm working on it because I think this is the way to go. And I'm glad I took this assignment to work on this. You need to tie your monitoring to a clear result. So as you teach people about monitoring, again, it's most important thing about your monitors or your people you're bringing in is that you allow them to cause results. You need to coordinate landowners and agencies. Don't forget, you always need to have the permission of the landowner before you move ahead and to have not upset the landowner by taking actions before you even engage them. Make success metrics reflect multi-year timelines so that when you're measuring things, you're looking for what your project is going to do. You have to look beyond having just a nice clean area when I'm done. You have to look at what it's going to be in the years ahead. You need to plant. You need to plant heavily with native plants. So effective IPM is a long-term stewardship commitment. And the tools that build community invasive plant management are shared playbooks. Suppose your watershed and the Blackstone watershed shared playbooks. Suppose the different watershed associations that I assume exist within your watershed use the same mapping program, looked at the same way to coordinate the pulling of garlic mustard, for instance. Any of those things. Citizen science and mapping are very important ways to build capacity, either through the schools or through the group that you're in, the introduction of iNaturalist, EdMaps, and any other programs, or even something that somebody develops in ArcGIS as to use. But get people involved in the actual science and measuring and determining what and where we need to do our work. The volunteer stewardship programs, of course. Professional invasive plant management support, absolutely crucial. That we have people that can come in and get the right information, get the peer-reviewed, studied information, and get results. Because everything I'm saying here is if you want to keep volunteers, you have to get results. Volunteers want to do something, accomplish something, have something to be proud of. That's what your volunteers want, and that's what we have to give them. And here's another secret. A few mini grants and some micro funding can really get things going. Oftentimes I get stuck on a project because maybe I need money to pay for the incineration of my hazardous plants that we've just removed. I don't want to send them. I'll give the example of sending them to a recycling or a composting problem. I don't want to do any of that. So I have to make sure I won't do a project if I don't have proper disposal. I have to make sure I have that. Sometimes it's 30, 50, $50. That's all that's needed. Or to pay for a permit application, things like that, mini grants, big thing. So citizen science, for looking for invasive alien species, there's a lot out there. It's well used for early detection and mapping. It has more potential to do a lot of things. And what I mean by citizen science, your best example are water chestnut poles, or any sort of, iNaturalist mapping project. So, we're coming to the end here of this portion. And so just a couple of questions before I get to look at the questions that you have before. What barriers show up most often? How can we support the next steps? And have you seen any of these patterns locally? So for further reading, and you'll be able to get these from the list, are some references that are handy. I'll leave these up for a second in case anybody wants to take a screenshot, but they will be available later. And this was just a link to the Facebook group that I run that's now called Ecologically Harmful Plants and Insects of Central Massachusetts. Um, I added the ecologically harmful to the name recently after being introduced to reasons to change the nomenclature, and it led me to read at least 10 different articles about it. There's many that are written recently, and that the changing of the language actually helps. And since I have added this ecologically harmful to my group, I've had an acceleration of new people signing up. So the public seems to like this, and it also is more certainly identifies the plants. So say what you will about this. I'm going for it. I'm going for it. So right now that finishes my part of the presentation. Marissa, if you can help me with the questions, we can move into that.
Great, sounds good. Yeah, so we'll give people a chance to put any questions they have in the chat or certainly raise their hand.
Mhm.
I was thinking during your talk, we're doing a lot of partnership building right now on our end and trying to think more about non-traditional groups, maybe folks we haven't thought of reaching out to in the past, but could be a really valuable partner. Do you have any examples of engaging these, more non-traditional groups, moving past the garden clubs and, how successful that's been?
Well, the group that comes up from Providence was a cycling group, and these groups. Now, here I am. I'm a 7-year-old, so I'm not as familiar with these things. But they use a chat in the Pawtucket area to go on bike tours and to see parks and go to other places. Um, so my son was in that group, and I said, well, these guys do all that stuff. Why don't you ask them if they want to come up for Earth Day, and I'll put a little party on at the house after, and they can come up. And so a few of them did the first year. Well, the next year I got 10 of them, and then the following year I got 8 of them. So they came back. So here was a group that does cycling. So start thinking about people who like the outdoors for whatever reason. They're getting on a bike to go outdoors, uh, hiking groups, and so on. But my method of contacting these groups is actually to go and volunteer or go on the hike with them or go on the walk with them. Because the only way I know how to meet people well and to understand them is to spend some time working with them. I'm not that good at having big conversations, but it has worked for me. Um, the other thing that I did is use the geography of my site. So, for instance, in Dodge Park, I went around to down the street, there was a local food garden. I went there, I volunteered, I got to know them. I actually have a plot there last year. And they, um, you know, I got a little fundraiser going for them to get them a turquoise table to meet in their garden. They became an excellent response. So what I do is try to find the groups that are tied to the outdoors, or if I have a particular concern about a site, I look at all the organizations that are geographically close. I've gotten to know the watershed associations by going to their meetings, finding out what they want to do. And last year was the first year when the Watershed Association came to me, Tatnick Brook, and said, can we do a purple loosestrife? in Coles Reservoir. So we've got to go out and go to the meetings, talk to the people, actually meet people face to face from the other groups. That's kind of how I address that. Did I touch on what you needed there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Those are great examples. And we did get a question in the chat. So, does the Blackstone Heritage Watershed Group have a licensed herbicide applicator? Or if not, how do you fund your work on sites where chemical remediation is needed?
Okay, we don't have one. But recently in our watershed, I was tasked by the DCR to come up with a list of contractors for an invasive plant mapping program that we're in the middle of right now, of mapping all the invasive plant groups that are within 100 feet of the bike trail between Worcester and Millbury. Um, that is going very well. We have found funding there because of so much degraded. I don't know, I don't recall exactly what the funding source was, but it's related to the damage that's been done to the land. I believe it was related to the super fund. And we got enough money to start there with mapping. Um, no, so we don't have anybody that actually does it, but we have, what I did is I had created this list because I like to do a lot of research of all the contractors that had done work for either Mass DOT roadside or the DCR. So I found them and then I wrote emails to all of them asking them about their prices and setup so that as a project planner, which I have some skills for, I would know what my labor inputs were. So I do have someone who will has priced a two-person team with the appropriate licensing to do wetland that costs about $1,500 for 4 hours with two workers. Um, since I have some idea how much that does, I have one project where the Greater Worcester Land Trust offered to pay part of that because the project I had wouldn't take 4 hours and they had adjacent property.
Mhm.
So I contacted them and they said, well, we'll throw 500 in. So I reduced the cost of one project by sharing it with someone else in the constraints of needing a 4 hour period, minimum 4 hours before they roll the equipment and the people. So this is how I work on getting that kind of help. I can mention specific contractors because they realize if they're really cooperative with us, there's a ton of jobs. So I wanted to know what was fair price for them, fair price for us, and I don't think I think the amount of work you can get done in 4 hours if you pre-prepared the area with volunteers, clearing appropriate brush and so on, preparing things in the right way, that you can, with little money, get things done properly and everything else. The other way I look to save money there is at least I can file the notice of intent and do some of the permitting, which seems to be a big expense when you hire an outside firm to help you permit. It can be expensive. So I look to save money, to spend money wisely. Um, and it's through sharing costs, uh, contacting these contractors ahead of time, develop a relationship, um, find out what they do, where their Facebook. I also do a lot of social media work with that. So I find out where their Facebook, what their advertising is like. In my invasive plants and insects, although I have a no advertising policy, I encourage I encourage professionals to write articles and post them that aren't directly for sale. So in the plants and insects of central Massachusetts, when you comment in there, you can be certain that there's over a dozen professionals who are in the business looking at your problem, and oftentimes they'll chime in. I and the group itself has grown beyond Worcester, so there are professionals who are monitoring it from uh, around the United States and a few from around the world. And that's because I keep sharing. And I think it's also because I try to maintain the discipline of not having my own information, but always looking for peer-reviewed studies to back up what I'm saying so that I can refer people to that. Did I cover that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that contractor list sounds invaluable. It's great. So yeah, there was just one more question. I know we're a bit over time, but I know you mentioned iNaturalist, but do you have experience with BioBlitz or using these open source tools to get people together who know plants and animals and draw attention to a particular area?
Um, I don't have any experience with BioBlitz, but I do have experience with, um, no, I don't.
Mhm.
So there's more that I can learn about this. I did this because I'm hoping that because I'm someone who's kind of in the middle of being recruited by the Blackstone Heritage Corridor, to really focus on watershed wide now, to reach down into Rhode Island, that I can bring you where I'm at, but do I have a mastery of the whole situation? No, but hopefully today I shared enough so that I helped and didn't chase everybody away.
No, we really appreciate it. It's been great to get your perspective on your work down in Worcester. So yeah, thank you so much for your talk. We definitely wish you the best of luck, and we're sure we'll cross paths again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for joining us. I just want to mention that the next installment of the speaker series will be on April 9th, where we'll have an in-person presentation by Daniel Beauvais, who's restoration ecologist for the Mass Division of Fish and Wildlife, and he'll provide an overview of Mass Wildlife's invasive species management program and speak to his experience managing invasives in rare species and sensitive habitat areas. This is at 9 o'clock at the NRWA, and we will have coffee and pastries, so don't worry. And then I just wanted to mention that the Wild and Scenic Stewardship Council's community grants application is currently open. It closes on March 6th. And that is a great way to get some funding for your invasive species management projects in addition to other projects as well. So please check that out. It's on the Natural Rivers Wild and Scenic Stewardship website. So, all right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Joe. We really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye.